In this episode, we talk about BJP's push to scrap caste reservation for backward class Muslims. We also talk about Apple's move to discontinue its high-end data protection feature for UK users. But first, we talk about the rise in ragging cases across India despite existing regulations. Hi, I'm Ichha Sharma and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express News Show. Ragging in Indian colleges continues to claim lives despite stringent guidelines and anti-ragging regulations. A recent investigation by the Indian Express accessed data through RTI requests and sources to reveal a sharp rise in complaints, exposing critical gaps in enforcement. Between 2012 and 2023, over 8,000 cases were reported to the University Grants Commission, that is the UGC helpline, with incidents ranging from brutal physical assaults to psychological harassment. Yet regulatory bodies have failed to take decisive action, with institutions often dismissing complaints as frivolous or unsubstantiated. Since 2012, at least 78 student deaths have been linked to ragging, with Maharashtra, Uttar Pradesh and Tamil Nadu among the worst affected states. Despite the Supreme Court's 2009 directive mandating swift action on ragging complaints, the UGC has yet to invoke penalties against non-compliant colleges. The gaps in enforcement extend beyond inaction. The Supreme Court's anti-ragging guidelines require institutions to file FIRs within 24 hours of a serious complaint, yet there is no mechanism to track compliance. Anti-ragging committees and squads mandated for regular surprise checks exist largely on paper, with no documented records of interventions. In this segment, the Indian Express's Rupsa Chakraborty, who reports on health for the newspaper, helps us examine the systematic failures, legal grey areas, and the growing demand for accountability in tackling these incidents. So, Rupsa, in the past few weeks, we have witnessed multiple ragging cases, some of which unfortunately have been fatal. So, could you tell us what you found about the rise in ragging complaints across institutions during your research?
So, our data collection established the fact that in the last 10 years, there has been a rise in the reporting of ragging incidences on the national helpline number of UGC for the anti-ragging complaint has increased by over 200%, which showed that how on a daily basis students are facing ragging despite it being banned 15 years back. Now the thing is that when we spoke with experts, professors, they say that it is just the tip of the iceberg. Because when we started investigating based on this data accumulation, we found out that many of the higher education and reputed institutions don't provide the contact details of the anti-ragging committee on their website, which is compulsory as per the guideline that was issued by Supreme Court in 2009. So in case a student who is already been ragged, a student who is already volatile mentally, the student will not know whom to contact. So the total number of anti-ragging cases that were recorded on the helpline number was over 8,000. So this 8,000 is just the tip of the iceberg.
Right, and also during your research, what were the key reasons that were behind this increase in ragging-related complaints?
There were several reasons that can have a social and economic background. For example, when we did the data analysis of over 8,000 cases, we found out that most number of ragging cases are being recorded in the medical colleges, and this has been the pattern for the last several years. When we spoke with experts and doctors, we found out that when a person does medicine, they are being trained to become emotionless, because when you operate on a patient, you cannot be emotional. You cannot show your emotion. So since their MBBS courses, they are being trained like that, and often the medical students are being overstretched while working. So to take out their frustration, they often target the vulnerable community or the marginalized community who have taken admission through quota, or a weak person, not a weak person but a feeble person who is not as outspoken or as we call street smart as they are. So they often target these soft people and start ragging them for their own fun. Experts also say that a primary reason for ragging is the sadistic pleasure that they get from ragging students.
And also you speak of the absence of a clear legal definition of ragging.
There are multiple definitions of ragging. So by ragging, we mainly understand that a person is physically hurt, right? When a person has taken his or her life, or there's some kind of physical marks on your body. But the actual meaning of ragging is very deep-seated. So even if I rag a person, a student, if I say something bad in a social media group, that can also be classified as ragging because I'm humiliating that person. Even for caste slur, if you are from a certain minority community and if I make fun of that community, if I start teasing you, that can also be called as ragging.
Right. And Rupsa, also considering you're speaking at length about this issue, could you also break down the concept of how the UGC's anti-ragging helpline actually functions?
So there are several branches, okay? So suppose I am a student, I am from a particular college, and as per the guideline, all colleges should have anti-ragging committee. So as per the rules, the colleges are supposed to display the contact details and name of the members of this anti-ragging committee who are from different backgrounds, including NGOs, in-house professors, mentors, then one journalist from the local background. So the committee numbers has to be displayed on the website of the universities. So if I am being ragged, then I can directly approach the committee, and it is the responsibility of the committee to maintain my anonymity. They cannot disclose my identity, and they can continue with their own investigation. This is one kind of way of filing your complaint. Now, if you're scared or you don't know whom to approach, then you can directly call at the anti-ragging national helpline number, which is being run by the UGC, which is the apex government regulating body of higher education. So you can disclose your name, or you can file the complaint on behalf of another person, or you can maintain your anonymity. Then they will generate a complaint ID number. Then they will follow up with the particular concerned college and the concerned department, and it is their duty to ask them to submit the anti-ragging committee reports. And a whole investigation goes on, which can be resolved within a week. And I have seen in several cases where it goes beyond 2 years. So when a complaint is filed on the helpline number, it is the responsibility of the UGC members to resolve the matter. So there are 2 ways to file the complaints.
And Rupsa, you've previously mentioned about Supreme Court's guidelines, for institutions. So could you tell us what are the key provisions in these guidelines on ragging prevention?
So there were, as I said earlier, there were several guidelines that were being laid by Supreme Court in 2009 to curb these incidences in higher education. And there are several compulsory rules that were supposed to be implemented across all registered universities and colleges. Now, one of the primary guideline issued was that during admission, all the students have to file an anti-ragging affidavit. So in that affidavit, it is written that a student will not participate or engage in any form of ragging. And every year, during the reissuing of their certificate or admission in second or third year, they need to sign the same affidavit every year. So for example, if a person is doing graduation of 3 years, then for 3 consecutive years, while filing their academic registration, the student needs to file at least 3 affidavits, anti-ragging affidavits. But this has not been followed. So we file RTI and we found out that only 4.4% of the total registered students are actually filing the anti-ragging affidavit. And why it is important? So when we file an affidavit, we comes under the legal obligation that we will not be participating any kind of ragging, and also it helps to sensitize the students who are not aware of such kind of incidences, because it has the definitions of ragging which we are lacking in our system.
And another interesting insight in your research is that you speak of a clause under UGC's anti-ragging regulation that states that it can take action against colleges that do not adequately prevent ragging, and that actually the UGC has never invoked this clause.
So under the High Court guidelines, it was also stated that if there's been repeated complaint of ragging from any particular college or university, the UGC has the power to cut their fund, grant, and even take stringent action against the university or the particular college. So we again file RTI and we found out that not a single case of cutting fund or taking stringent action against any college has been done. We found out that the colleges like Banaras Hindu University has the highest number of ragging complaints filed on the National helpline number, and B, Banaras Hindu University is a big name. Despite that, no official action was being taken against the university. Action has been taken in particular ragging complaints, but not against the university. And also we found out that when a complaint is registered on the helpline number or with the anti-ragging committee, within 24 hours, it is the duty of the college authority to file an official FIR with the nearby police station. And it is the responsibility of the college to inform the police about that particular ragging incident. Whether it's proven or not, it is up to the investigation. But when a complaint is filed, they have to do it within the 24 hours. Now again, we file an RTI, we found out that no record of filing an FIR are being maintained by UGC. So if there is no accountability, if they don't know how many complaints, so if you have 8,000 registered complaint on your helpline number, they should have the documents, right? Ki how many FIRs are being followed after registering a complaint on with the helpline number or with the college anti-ragging committees. But as there is no accountability, no stringent action, colleges or universities, they don't care.
Rupsa, as you mentioned earlier, that the complaints that you investigated were just the tip of the iceberg. So can you firstly tell us how does the UGC track ragging incidents, and also what changes do experts recommend to strengthen anti-ragging enforcement?
Yeah, so as I said, there are several clauses that were being laid out, but I don't think that they are officially following it, because when we were doing the ragging investigation, we found out that the helpline number was supposed to be running in 14 languages, 14 regional languages, including Hindi and English. But we found out that time it was running only on 2 languages, Hindi and English. So there are several loopholes in the implementation. So I actually don't know if anti-ragging rules are being implemented, because on a daily basis we are seeing so many incidences. There is a need for sensitizing the students and the real definition. If you see the recent video, what happened in Kerala was that guy who was physically harmed, and he was being stabbed with syringe and scissors, and they were making fun of it. I don't know if they had realized it, that is considered as not fun but ragging. I think when we were speaking with the experts, what they suggested is that to include a chapter on the real definition of ragging, the guidelines, and what happens if you violate the act. In that case, it will not only sensitize but also include some kind of fear and legal binding, that if they do something like that, then there will be legal obligation. They will be imprisoned. In case of doctors, they might even lose their license. And also there is a need for better maintenance of the helpline number.
And lastly, Rupsa, there are a lot of survivors of ragging incidents, who need to cope up with the trauma that they've been through. So what kind of support is available for them?
See, there were lack of such facilities previously, but I can say in the last 5 years there have been improvement because of media reporting and growing sensitization and all. Now colleges do provide counseling facilities, but I would like to include that while we are providing counseling to the students, we are completely ignoring the families, which was my second part of my investigation, because we know that 78 students have lost their life to ragging. Right? Alleged ragging. So we also tracked down 12 of the parents whose children have died due to alleged ragging. And many of the families we have tracked back 10 years ago. So for the last 1 decade, they have been going from court hearing to another court hearing, police investigation, and knocking at the doors of the police station. But in none of the cases, the case has been resolved. So the families are still waiting for justice. And what happens is that the lack of cooperation from the universities or colleges, because we checked almost all the anti-ragging committee reports of the 78 cases. And in all the cases, in most of the cases, except in few incidences where media had highlighted it incidences, in most of the cases, we found out that anti-ragging committee of the colleges had given clearance, or they had upruled the allegation of ragging. But when it went to the court hearing, there were such serious evidences that were being put out which clearly shows that it was a case of ragging. But again, there are no solution, and the parents keep waiting for justice.
And next, we talk about the Pasmanda Muslim community in Telangana. The Bharatiya Janata Party is heavily pushing to scrap the reservation for Pasmanda Muslims in Telangana, a move that has raised questions about the party's reservation framework. This comes in the wake of caste survey by the Revant Reddy-led Congress government, which reported that 10.8% of Telangana's population comprises of backward class Muslims. The BJP's Pasmanda outreach began in Telangana in 2022 after Prime Minister Narendra Modi told party leaders they should reach out to marginalized Muslims. And ahead of last year's Lok Sabha polls, PM Modi accused the Congress and Samajwadi Party of marginalizing the Pasmanda Muslims and added that the community must be given opportunities. At present, Pasmanda Muslims benefit from a 4% reservation in state government jobs and educational institutions under the backward class category.
Pasmanda is basically an umbrella term which is used to include Muslims who are from the backward classes, who are Dalit, who are tribal, whose religion is Islam, but who belong to historically marginalized castes.
That's the Indian Express's Nikhila Henry, who covers minority affairs for the newspaper.
So they are the ones who are generally called as Pasmanda Muslims, and in the context of Telangana, there are Muslims, who are into weaving, which is a caste occupation. There are Muslims who are barbers, which is again a caste occupation. So such Muslims are classified under the Pasmanda Muslim category in Telangana, and they belong to the backward classes in the Telangana state list of backward classes. So they are the ones who are getting reservation basically.
Some BJP leaders acknowledged that the outreach did not bring the expected returns as the party called for a quota for Pasmanda Muslims without taking into account the socio-economic composition of the entire community. With the BJP leaders, including Union Minister Bandi Sanjay Kumar, arguing that such classification is unconstitutional and unfairly disadvantages non-Muslim BC communities, the controversy has led to the gaps within BJP's outreach to the marginalized Muslim groups. Nikhila, could you start by telling us what the recent Telangana caste survey has highlighted, particularly about the backward class Muslims?
So Telangana's Congress government did a caste survey which basically said that 2.48% of Telangana's population are forward caste Muslims and 10.08% of the population are backward class Muslims. So what it basically found was that, the percentage of Muslims who belong to the backward classes are, quite high when compared to the percentage of Muslims who belong to the forward caste or the dominant caste. So what the government has said is that, the Muslims who fall under the backward class category will continue to have the reservation which is in place, that is 4% reservation. That is exclusively for backward class Muslims or Pasmanda Muslims and not for forward caste Muslims.
Also, could you talk about what was the rationale behind including certain Muslim communities in the backward class category?
So the backward class Muslims in Telangana, they fall under the BCE category. So that is a state classification and that has been in place since more than a decade. I think more than 2 decades, this backward class Muslim reservation has been in place. So the rationale behind including some castes of Muslims among the BCs is that just like any other backward class, just like the center's OBC list, which basically includes certain sections of non-Muslim population under the OBC category, the state also has a certain classification which basically says that certain classes of Muslims or basically certain castes among Muslims are backward in terms of socio-economic parameters, because of which they need reservation and they are included in the backward class list. And it is the people who are included in this backward class list who are Pasmanda Muslims, who are getting reservation in the state list.
And also, Nikhila, how has the implementation of this reservation exactly benefited the Pasmanda Muslim community in the state?
Yeah, so the benefits of reservation is basically about, 4% reservation in educational institutions which belong to the government and 4% reservation for employment, government jobs, basically. So now the state plans to continue with that reservation. So that's the benefit.
Right, and it was back in 2022 that Prime Minister Narendra Modi encouraged outreach to Pasmanda Muslims, and now the BJP opposed the backward class Muslim reservation. So could you please break down this strategy?
So what the BJP is saying is that we will oppose Muslim reservation, but in essence, what has happened in Telangana is that they happen to oppose the backward class Muslim reservation, which is against their Pasmanda pitch. The BJP has consistently been saying that they support the Pasmanda cause and that they have continuously been saying that, Pasmanda Muslims should get a better share in the nation building process, and that, they were backward for quite a long time, and that the Ashraf Muslims have basically been, subjugating the Pasmanda Muslims. So when the same BJP says in Telangana that, they are against Muslim reservation, what they essentially mean is that they are against Pasmanda Muslim reservations. So there is a dichotomy there, and the state BJP unit has not actually addressed that. So it does not actually align with that strategy. That's the dichotomy in the state of Telangana right now. Now that the caste survey is out, and now that we know that as per the caste survey, 10.08% of the population of Telangana belong to backward class Muslims, and that is quite a huge population, right? So now, since the Pasmanda Muslims in Telangana, the percentage of theirs is so high, based on their previous policy on Pasmanda Muslims, the BJP should actually be supporting the BC reservation for Pasmanda Muslims, ideally. But what has happened is that, the BJP leaders have consistently in Telangana have consistently been saying that they are against Muslim reservations, which essentially means that they are against backward class Muslim reservations. So there is a dichotomy in what their central policy was since 2022 and what is being said in the state.
And Nikhila, some BJP leaders argue that Muslims should not have a separate caste-based reservation, and they should instead benefit from the 10% economically weaker section, that is the EWS quota. So can you tell us the key differences between these two approaches?
EWS quota, or economically weaker sections quota, which is 10% reservation across the country, right? So that is different from caste-based reservation. So what is happening in Telangana and Andhra Pradesh is that some castes among Muslims are given backward class reservation. And that means they are given caste-based reservation and not religion-based reservation. So the Pasmanda Muslims in Telangana and Andhra Pradesh enjoy this, backward class Muslim reservation status because certain castes among them are backward. Yeah. So that is different from the EWS quota where anybody, including the forward or dominant caste people, can avail reservation based on their income status.
Also, could you tell us how have Pasmanda Muslim leaders and community organizations responded to this proposal to scrap the quota?
The Pasmanda Muslim organizations have been against the scrapping of the quota, as is understandably, and predictably from their side. They do not want their reservation to be taken away from them.
And also, Nikhila, as you mentioned earlier, Telangana's caste survey found that 10.8% of Muslims belong to the backward classes. So could you talk about what main concerns did BJP leaders raise?
So now, after the caste survey came out, one of the reasons why the BJP has opposed to the survey is the classification of the backward classes into non-Muslim and Muslim backward classes. So they have been saying that that sort of a classification is not possible. And I think it was Union Minister G. Kishan Reddy who basically said that that defeats the whole purpose of reservation for backward classes. So they have been up in arms against it. And the rest of it, the caste survey and what exactly are the opposition towards it. There are some people who say that the backward classes were undercounted. Especially the BJP and the BRS parties have been saying that backward classes have been undercounted in the state.
And lastly, could you talk about what would be the impact of removing this reservation on the community in the state?
There are a lot of backward class Muslims or Pasmanda Muslims who have been enjoying this reservation for quite some time. So it will be very difficult for them to kind of, get the government jobs or, it will be difficult for them to compete with others in the 10% EWS quota if it is removed. But there is no such proposal to remove it as such.
And in the end, we talk about Apple's removal of advanced data protection in the UK. Apple's decision to discontinue its advanced data protection or the ADP feature in the United Kingdom has reignited debates over digital privacy and government surveillance. ADP, a high security encryption feature for iCloud backups, ensures that even Apple itself cannot access users' data.
Apple is taking the unprecedented step of removing its highest level data security tool from customers in the UK.
Apple says that it can no longer offer its most advanced security for users in the UK.
The UK Parliament ordered Apple to build a backdoor to give it access to user data, not only for users who live in the UK, but users globally. And so Apple essentially had an option. But what they decided to do instead is simply remove their upgraded end-to-end encryption feature that's called advanced data protection. Gives you extra
The Indian
security.
Express's Anuj Bhatia, who covers technology for the newspaper, said that, however, the UK government's demand for access to encrypted content under the Investigatory Powers Act has forced Apple to withdraw the feature rather than create a backdoor for law enforcement. The move has raised concerns among privacy advocates who argue that government pressure on tech firms is undermining users' rights to secure personal data. Apple first introduced ADP as part of iOS 16.2 in early 2023, responding to growing demands for stronger encryption. Anuj states that before this, iCloud backups were vulnerable to government requests, as Apple retained the ability to decrypt them when legally compelled. The new system placed the encryption keys solely in the hands of the users, making law enforcement access nearly impossible without the user's cooperation. This fundamental shift puts Apple on a collision course with governments advocating for surveillance measures, including the UK's Home Office. The UK's Investigatory Powers Act, often dubbed the Snoopers Charter, gives authorities wide-ranging powers to demand user data from tech firms. The government argues that strong encryption impedes criminal investigations, including counter-terrorism and child exploitation cases. Under proposed updates to the IPA, companies like Apple would be required to provide access to encrypted data on demand. Apple, refusing to compromise its security framework, instead chose to remove ADP for UK devices, preventing new users from enabling the feature. Anuj highlights that privacy advocates warn that UK's stance sets a dangerous precedent for global tech policy. If Apple had agreed to create a backdoor, it could have weakened encryption standards worldwide, exposing users to cyber attacks and government overreach. Meanwhile, civil liberties groups argue that forcing companies to build such vulnerabilities contradicts fundamental rights to privacy and digital security. Apple maintains that its encryption policies prioritize user safety, ensuring that personal information remains inaccessible to unauthorized entities, including the company itself. Anuj also explains that for UK users, the removal of ADP does not immediately compromise all iCloud data. Apple still offers end-to-end encryption for select services, including iMessage, FaceTime, and Apple Keychain. However, users who previously enabled ADP can no longer turn it on for their new devices, limiting future access to security. While Apple's decision preserves its encryption policies globally, it also highlights the increasing pressure on tech firms to comply with government regulations. You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar and produced by Shashank Bhargav and me, Ichha Sharma. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.